Howdy, and welcome to the F1 Hatchet, and welcome to my Miami post-race reaction. First of all, I would like to thank all my subscribers and my viewers for these videos. I appreciate you, and hopefully you can want to see more of this in the future. Now, what was your thoughts on this race? First, I was going to think this is going to be a very dull and boring race, kind of like last year, kind of a boring Miami race. Not a very good track, and not a very good race to go along with it. But things got a little bit exciting with the pit stop strategy because of Kevin Magnussen's collision, and causing that pit stop strategy to really come into play just at the right time for McLaren and get out into the lead. And I was really thinking that Max Verstappen was going to actually come back from that and actually maybe not win it, but at least put pressure on Norris through the rest of this race and get a little bit more action than we saw. But it was still exciting to see what kind of happened and kind of get on your edge of the seat to see if they could actually pull it off for that first win for Lando. What was your thoughts? I guess I'll have to give it like a 6, maybe a 7. The racing traffic at the front was not that great, and because the instances at the back were fairly good, but not really in the front of the field. We had some kind of instances that kind of pushed us at the very beginning of the race, some cars back a few spots that they had to kind of make up, and that kind of staled a little bit, but in regards. And then, of course, you had the pit stop strategy that kind of just didn't quite play out for most of the teams, but had helped a few of those teams. So I'll probably give it like a 6 or a 7. Not quite what I was expecting. I was expecting a fairly dull race, as I said earlier, but it ended up fairly good in my viewpoint. We'll have to see how they play out in the future. And of course, this gives us hope, the way that McLaren was kind of running this circuit, to see if those upgrades can really perform extra well in future races like Imola, and see if they can actually put some more pressure on the Red Bull team so we can get some more racing for the lead, and see if that helps in that regard. So, without further ado, I'll go from the last to the first on the drivers, give them my standpoint of what happened to them, if I know, and kind of how well they did in my viewpoint. So, without further ado, we will start off with Logan Sargent. And this is kind of what we ended up here. He qualified in 17th. Not as good as he did in the sprint race, and I know he's hoping for a lot more during this stint of this GP race to really kind of show what he could do. Unfortunately, he got taken out by Kevin Magnussen in this regard, and kind of got pushed out, kind of hit as he was coming around the corner. Kevin not quite making it to the alongside position during the corner, so Kevin actually got the penalty for it, and that caused Logan to kind of spin out and hit the barrier that basically ended his day. And that happened fairly quick on lap 28, I think. So the first kind of the race, he started off running decently, had some little bit of action, then doing a decent job. He couldn't quite get that fight going, and then he was passing back and forth a little bit with K-Mag, and of course K-Mag just kind of put it where he probably shouldn't have had. So I can't really blame Logan Sargent for this one, and it's kind of a shame that he's out. I think he was doing okay, maybe not the greatest that he was hoping for, but at least okay driving in this race. Now we have Alex Albon, who qualified in 14th and ended up in 19th. He had some good on-track action, but ended up having some other issues, and then having him pull back into the back part of this grid near the end, and so that kind of threw things off for him as well. But I have him passing Esteban Ocon on lap 3 for 15th, and Stroll on lap 13 for 17th. He had a nice good fight with Stroll for a few other laps during this intermix as well. So he had some decent action, didn't really show up. He had to come back and just ended up dropping back down the field due to some other issues on that Williams. Not quite where they were hoping to be this weekend altogether, and hopefully they can figure out that data, figure out what happened, and kind of bring it together for the Imola race in a couple of weeks. Kevin Magnussen wasn't the driver of the day, because that went to Lando, of course, but I will probably give Kevin Magnussen the driver of the weekend, as he really made this weekend very entertaining for both the sprint race and for the GP race. Now, he got lots of penalty points, and so this is going to cause him lots of headaches in the future, because having a bunch of penalty points in one weekend, staying on there for so long, is going to make it really hard for him to tiptoe around these other cars, as he likes to have his elbows out and really defend and really put pressure on some of these things. So he's probably going to see a race penalty probably, and be suspended for a race because of points in the future, as he got some more points deducted during this race because of that incident with Logan Sargent causing that collision. And so with that, he's going to really be pushing that limit on him. He did start in 18th and ended up in 18th. He did gain a position on the start of the race, had a nice fight going through those areas, and ended up, with Daniel as well, but couldn't really maintain it. And then once he got that penalty, they basically said, hey, don't put any pressure on anybody else, because we don't want you to be having to be suspended and get those extra points after that run. So he ended up kind of dropping back because he had to pit again to change out some components because of the collisions that he had. So that kind of put him back in the field to start off with, and then didn't want to be too pressured to try to jump back through the back of the field because of those point standings that he was in. So that wasn't the greatest for this race, but it did bring out the safety car just at the right time so that Norris could actually pit and maintain the lead. And that kind of gave us all a nice breath of fresh air and trying to see what was going to happen with Verstappen. As I said later, and I'll probably get back to that, but him being able, having that little bit of issue, it doesn't look good on Kevin, but it kind of made the race what it was for this GP race. And then, of course, with him defending so heavily in the sprint race, that made that so much better in that viewingship as well. So Kevin gets my driver of the weekend, even though it's probably not really prominent in that function of giving someone that gives penalties and causes other drivers to get knocked out a good momentum. But I think he's kind of made this weekend better in regards to the viewership of these races. So hats off to him, even though I know it wasn't what he wanted, and I know it was kind of hurting him in that regard as well, and he's going to have to really tiptoe from the rest of the season. So we'll see how that plays out for Kevin Magnussen, trying to keep that seat at that Haas. Lance Stroll qualified in 11th and ended up in 17th. He had some decent action with Albon and Daniel and Juan Yu, passing them back and forth for 14th and 15th positions. He did get a 10-second penalty for leaving the track with gaining an advantage, and that's what kind of pushed him back in the field as far back as he is in that 17th position. So, of course, it's Lance Stroll, so it's hard to see how he's going to get kicked out of that Aston Martin, but he is not really playing up to his teammate, where his teammate ends up with that Aston Martin. So it's kind of a interesting look for Lance Stroll. He's not a bad driver in total regards, but he's not getting everything out of the Aston Martin as we can see other drivers doing, like Alonso. So hopefully this is just a bad weekend and he can kind of get back into the rhythm of things as we've seen him in the past and do fairly well. This weekend wasn't very good for him. I think even though he had some on-track action, he was kind of pushing it. So getting that 10-second penalty after even knowing what happened to Kevin in the sprint race, so that kind of puts that on him for this regard. So not the best look for Lance this weekend. Even being behind Valtteri Bottas, who qualified in 16th and ended up in 16th. I don't have a whole lot for Bottas. He was near the back of the pack. I do have him passing K-Mag on lap 3 for that 18th position, as he did not have a very good start, losing 3 positions on the start of the race in this regard. So kind of fighting out in the back, ended up where he kind of qualified from. I know he's trying to look for a position next year for his driver's spot too, so hopefully he can have a better showing in Imola, as he wasn't really together on this race. As far as I could tell, it wasn't really bad in regards of getting into trouble, but not the greatest out of that stake F1 team. Daniel Ricciardo qualified, he started off with the race in 20th, qualified in 18th, had some little bit of work done on that RB, and then so he started at the back of the pack and ended up in 15th position. I know he was not that happy this weekend with his teammate going all the way up to 7th, I believe. Yeah, 7th, where Yuki ended up. So he has a little bit of gap there, and when he's trying to shine in for that seat for the RB, it's kind of hard for him to do that. I know the sprint race was really good, and somehow he messed up on the qualifying for the GP race, putting him back in that back of the field anyway. So hopefully he can get those things worked out and still remain positive, as I know that really helps him, get the most out of the car that he is in. Juan Zhou qualified in 19th and ended up in 14th, so a pretty good running from him. He was having to fight Hulkenberg and passed him on lap 34 for 14th, and he passed Albon on lap 52 for that 14th position. So he kind of had some battles at the back. He started off on mediums and then switched to softs, so that kind of pushed that soft tire a little bit harder than the rest of them in that middle section. So hopefully, as I said, do a better job overall for the team, and if they can figure out what's going on with that stake F1 to get it more competitive, so they can be in that mid pack with the rest of them. Oscar Piastri qualified in 6th and ended up in 13th, which doesn't look very good, but if you looked at him, he was doing really well. He had lots of on-track action, and at one point he was actually in second position going down the lane. He got the fastest lap near the end of the race, but doesn't count for points because he wasn't in that 10th position. But it does take it away from his teammate or Max Verstappen in that regard. Probably his teammate, and so I think they were trying to push him a little bit later in the end of the race to try to calm it down, so to make sure that he didn't cause any kind of other safety car issues that would interfere with Lando's win. So, because I know he's coming through the pack trying to come through the pack pretty strong after he had that wing issue that he had when he was fighting Carlos Sainz, that caused that wing damage for him that really hurt his performance, and had 2 cars pass him right after that. And then so they decided to pull him in and change that wing and see what happens. And he was able to make it from that end position, the 20th position, all the way back up to 13th. So it's still a good run for Oscar. Really good showing, I think, for him. He was really doing well. As I said, he passed Leclerc on lap 5 for that second position. And then he had a good fight with Sainz that ended up having him drop back in the field. So then he kind of had to come back from passing K-Mag and Bottas and Daniel Ricciardo and the like, so that trying to work his way into those realms and trying to eventually end up in that 13th position overall. So a really good run, even though it doesn't show it on paper, for Oscar Piastri in that run. He may have pushed Sainz a little hard in that regard, that he may be able to learn to try to figure out where to pick those battles from, but still a good running from Oscar Piastri, and a really good showing for McLaren in the sense that we saw them being really competitive with the Ferraris and potentially the Red Bulls as well. So that leads us to some hope in the future GP races to see if McLaren can really push their way up and have that third team fighting for those positions at the front. Then we have Pierre Gasly, who qualified in 12th and ended up in 12th. I don't have a whole lot going on for him. He did lose a position at the very start of the race, but kind of maintained that. He started off on mediums, switched to hards fairly early in the race, and I think that kind of hurt him throughout this race because he couldn't take advantage of either the virtual safety car or the safety car in that regard to really pushing forward. And then it was kind of having those used hard tires through a long stint. So doing a decent job. I know that Alpine has done a lot better, getting down to the weight limit and being able to really put more pressure on the rest of them. And with Ocon getting that point, getting that extra jump in the constructor standings always helps. So I'm sure they can learn a lot from both of these drivers this weekend and the data they pull off to see if they can tweak some other things and maybe bring some other updates that will help them out fighting that midfield and maybe even bump them up into the front runner packs. Then we have Nico Hülkenberg, who qualified in 9th and ended up in 11th. He had some fights and he was trying to be relatively army, I guess, and getting those elbows out with Hamilton backing up the field because that Haas wasn't quite as fast as the rest of the field behind him, holding up the pack at the beginning of the race, and eventually with that fight ended up having to let Hamilton go, and then that kind of opened up the floodgates in the sense that started dropping back into that mid pack, and then truly trying to fight for that 10th position, but not quite gaining it overall. So he did pass Hamilton on lap 2 for 7th, and he was repassed Hamilton on lap 8 for 7th, and I have him passing with a nice fight with Gasly, eventually passing him on lap 46 for that 11th position. So he was doing some pretty good fighting, but with that Haas, it really didn't shine at this track. Again, didn't have the front line speed, and so he was really kind of holding up some of the front runners that were kind of stuck behind him, in that 10th on positions that the Mercedes found themselves in and had to get back through the field, and that kind of made a little train going through this race. But once that kind of broke, that kind of ended up throughout this setting. So not the greatest race for Haas, but still a decent showing. I'm sure they can get some good data from this stint, this Miami GP. So that ends the bottom 10. This leads us to the top 10. So we have Esteban Ocon qualifying in 13th and ended up in 10th. He did lose a position as well at the beginning of the race, but he was able to take advantage of the virtual safety car and pit in that half lap that the virtual safety car was out to get tires, and so he had fresh tires to fight those people in front of him and was able to work his way into that last point position, gaining Alpine a point. So a good run from them. Hopefully this gives them the confidence that they need to help give them that boost, as I said, for future races, and with that Alpine being back down to the weight limit, that'll help them as well. So I'm sure they're working hard in this run, and I think Ocon did a pretty good job of getting into that last position and gaining that point. So good on Ocon for doing that. Fernando Alonso qualified in 15th and worked his way up to 9th. He didn't gain 3 positions at the very beginning of the race. He passed Hulkenberg on lap 26 for 13th, and he had a nice fight wheel to wheel with Ocon, and ended up finally getting past him on lap 48 for that 9th position. And so he was able to maintain that at the end and gain a couple of points for Aston Martin. So good for Fernando. I know they were having a struggle this weekend getting that car balanced correctly for them, but he is still getting the most out of that Aston Martin and gaining as many points as he possibly can. George Russell qualified in 7th and ended up in 8th. He did lose 3 positions, so he had a horrible start at the very beginning of the race, but he was kind of had to work his way back through that. Started off on mediums, switched to hards on lap 25, passed Hulkenberg on lap 12 for 8th, and Ocon on lap 26 for that 11th position. And then worked his way up into that 8th position with all of the pit stop strategies later in the race. So I know that's not where Mercedes wants to be, but it was still looking better than what they were showing off in that sprint race, not really gaining any ground. So that's a positive for Mercedes, and I think George has still had a good time in this race, even though he was kind of in that front part of that mid-pack in this setting. Now, Yuki Tsunoda had a great race, qualified in 10th and ended up in 7th. He did gain 1 position at the very beginning of the race and was able to just really manage those tires throughout this race and keep those positions where he needed to. I don't have him a lot on track action, but making the most out of that tire strategy and coming into that 7th position, gaining him an extra 6, that helps the RB team significantly in their battle with Haas, and actually bumping up now to Aston Martin. So that's good to see the RB team coming into play. Lewis Hamilton qualified in 8th, ended up in 6th. He did gain just 1 position at the very beginning of the race, and then he passed Hulkenberg on lap 7 for 7th. Repassed Hulkenberg on lap 10 for 7th. Passed Tsunoda on lap 34 for 7th. Passed Ocon on lap 40 for 6th. So he had a little bit of on-track action as well. He pitted on lap 27, switching from hards to mediums. So not quite making that safety car limit, but getting close to that run. So doing a really well job for Lewis. I know he was really happy this weekend being able to actually race drivers instead of, getting tire strategies be the play for the positions that they make. So really putting some action on track made him a lot happier. So hopefully he can continue that and be able to help Mercedes in this battle to get closer to the McLarens. Sergio Perez didn't have a very good race. In fact, he was almost caused some big incidences at the start of the race. He did qualify in 4th and ended up in 5th. He basically shot down the inside and then locked it up heavily and almost collided with his teammate, knocking his teammate out. But that pushed Sainz and a couple other drivers where they had to take kind of an evasive maneuvers not to get collected with him locking up and going through the corner. So that pushed their spots back that they had to fight through. But once he got into the back, then basically he kind of stayed there for the most part. He did have some action trying to work his way back up in the sense that he was past Ocon on lap 19 for 9th, Tsunoda on lap 24 for 8th, and Oscar Piastri on lap 40 for that 5th position. So he did have to work his way through this, but the start of the race kind of caused him to be in the position that he was at, so it's not the greatest part for Perez. Really locking the tires up. If he had collided, he would have probably gotten a penalty for that, but luckily everybody was able to avoid him and get out of the way, even though it cost them some positions. So he didn't have a great weekend. He still gained some points for Red Bull, which is good to see. But overall, this is kind of getting to him, I think, in that regard for this weekend. And so he was really trying to push forward after not quite qualifying where I think he was thinking that he should have been at. Carlos Sainz qualified in third and ended up in fourth. I know he was had pretty good pace and was trying to get him to swap with his teammate, trying to get him to move forward. And then when that incident happened, he got behind Oscar, and then he had a nice battle with Oscar Piastri, and finally got past him on lap 40 for that fourth position. Even though he ended up causing some push off and doing that damage for Oscar Piastri's vehicle. So I know they're investigating that now. So I haven't heard anything from that review. So there may be a penalty for Carlos Sainz in that regard. But I don't think so. I think it's probably a racing incident in regards to how that played out. But we'll have to wait and see for that. But I know he was kind of frustrated in that moment because I thought he was gaining an advantage on the being outside the track or some other things that he wasn't, that Oscar wasn't getting penalized for in that regard. And so I think he was trying to figure out how he could get past it because he knew he had the pace to help run with that. And so I think that kind of caused some other risk that he took to make him get into that fourth position. So his teammate, Charles Leclerc, was in third when he finished the race and qualified in second. So it was a good run for him. He actually had a bad start for this race that made him back up the field a little bit, and that almost caused some other issues in regards to Perez and Hamilton in regards to the backing up, figuring out where people were going to line up. And then you had Hamilton that he passed on lap 20 for that fifth position and worked his way back up into that third spot. So a decent show for Ferrari. Not where I think they were hoping that they could be like second and third or possibly first. I don't think that they really thought they had a chance at first at the beginning of this race, even though they say that they think they had some pace. I think they were going to have to fight and figured that Max was going to win overall, but they were hoping that they would be up a couple of positions and where they were kind of pushed back because of Lando moving forward. But a good running, good show. I think they have some stuff coming, so hopefully Imola will give a better showing for Ferrari to help push them into those McLarens and Red Bull for the fight for the first in Imola in a couple of weeks. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out, if I hear correctly on what I heard from Fred for sure. Max qualifying first, ended up in second. I thought he was going to run away with this race. He had a pretty decent start on this race and then kind of went with it. He was struggling in that Red Bull. I don't think they had that Red Bull kind of balanced, lined up correctly. I know he came on the radio a couple of times saying how awful it was, but he was getting the most out of that Red Bull that he could. Maintained the first position. Lap 10, he was 2.7 seconds ahead of Charles Leclerc, so I thought he was just going to end up being in that running. He did cause this virtual safety car because of him cutting the corner and hitting the bollard, knocking that bollard out of position and where it laid on the track. So it was kind of a dangerous position to be in. So that caused the virtual safety car, but he didn't even get to take advantage of the virtual safety car because it ended before he could actually make it around the lap and back into the pits. And he did pit instead of getting waved off. And so that caused him to pit under normal circumstances instead of waiting for the full safety car that happened just a few laps later. And so for him, it didn't really occur too well on when that safety car came out and not being able to take advantage of those situations. But in regards, I do have Norris kind of running away from the field from him Once he got in the lead with those new sets of hard tires that he had, he kind of just gained some ground every time. And from my viewpoint, I was not expecting that. I was expecting, Max to be able to at least put up a fight, if not pass Lando on track for that first position again. So that's good sight, good thoughts for future races to see if they're actually McLaren has done what they needed to do to actually compete with Red Bull and the Ferraris in this running for that first couple positions. And hopefully that's the case. That'll make things a lot more exciting throughout the rest of the season. So we come with Lando, who basically I don't think passed anybody on track. Qualified in 5th, ended up in 1st, mainly because he went 30 laps on a set of medium tires, and then switched to the hard tires when the safety car came out. So he had that nice, easy pit stop where he didn't lose too much ground, was able to come back out on first position after he gained it from his teammate, Oscar, pulling into the pits, and Max pulling into the pits for their pit stops, gaining the first position, and then maintain that first position for the rest of the field. So how the race went that I saw was like lap 10. Max had a 2.7 second lead. Then he kind of pitted fairly early, and then on lap 24, that gave Oscar the lead, and he ended up having a 2.8 second lead on lap 25. And then Norris came and had a 2.7 second lead over Max in lap 40. And by the end, though, he had a 7.6 second lead over Max. And so that kind of surprised me that he had such a big gap. I knew he was going to run his tires when he first started, gaining that 1 second to get him out of the DRS range from Max Verstappen. And so I thought he was going to wear out his tires a little bit to get to that point and then just try to maintain that position. But he was able to gain ground pretty much from that point on, gaining that nice 7 second gap between him and Max, which is unusual to see. So I'm not sure how bad that Red Bull was in their setup. But hopefully this is a good sign, as I said before, that we will see some nice racing from this point forward in this season. Now, Lando did get the driver of the day, as he kind of obviously, since he got his first win after coming so close for so many races here and there, and kind of being backed up by his teammates, gaining podiums and wins, not quite ever making it to that top step. So it is good to see him in that top step and getting the driver of the day. It's nice to see the emotion kind of running across him in that first position. So if you made it this far, I appreciate a like and a subscribe. And we'll see what happens to the driver standings. And we have Max Verstappen still in the lead with 136. With Lando Norris catching up to Carlos Sainz with 83, where Carlos has 85. So that kind of gap has dropped significantly. And then basically what we do see is Yuki Tsunoda bumping up to 10th, and that's good to see. And we have Esteban Ocon gaining that point, bumping up to 15th. I should have had Lance Stroll dropping back in red to 11th, and I apologize for not having that color coded correctly. Kevin Magnussen and Alex Albon get drops because Esteban jumping up and having the position on them during this race. So that puts that into perspective. And of course we have Albon, Juan Yuzhou, Pierre Gasly, Valtteri Bottas, and Logan Sargent not having scored yet. And for the constructor standing, so basically we have Red Bull now having 237 points over Ferrari's 189. Basically, we have McLaren gaining a little bit of ground on Ferrari, as not quite as much as they would like because of the two Ferraris being able to have a double point score, whereas Oscar kind of dropped out during the GP race. And then, of course, with Alpine getting that point, they jumped ahead of Williams. And then, of course, you see RB gaining some extra points, so they're up to 19, so a good margin ahead of Haas. And that kind of pretty much ends up the Miami GP. What's coming up next is the Imola or Italia GP race, and in a couple of weeks, and it will be 3.05 miles long with a total laps distance of 192.034 miles, with 63 laps being run. And it was first introduced in 1980, and the current record holder for the lap is Lewis Hamilton in 2020 with 1 minute 15.484 seconds. And that's again in a couple of weeks, and I'll be back to our normal race schedule with just the practice sessions Friday and the qualifying on Saturday, with the main GP race, of course, on Sunday, May 19th. And until then, I will see you on the grid, and farewell.